The wind is a thief in this part of the country. It steals the warmth from a person's bones and the hope from their heart, leaving behind nothing but grit and a hard-bitten resolve. Alara knows this wind. It is the same one that whispered through the cottonwoods on the day she buried her husband, Thomas, and it is the same one that now pushes against her as she coaxes her stubborn mule, Patience, up the rise. It is from this vantage point, with the vast, unforgiving plains of the Wyoming Territory sprawling before her, that she sees it. A horse, riderless, its head hung low as it grazes on a patch of stubborn buffalo grass. It is a fine-looking animal, a deep chestnut with a strong back and clean legs, far too fine for a stray. Its saddle is well made, its reins trailing in the dust. Something is wrong. A man thrown, or worse. Duty, a concept as unyielding as the bedrock beneath her feet, compels her forward. There's more to this horse than meets the eye. Before its true worth or secret comes to light, tell us, have you ever misjudged someone only to be surprised? And if you love a story of hidden depths, hit like and subscribe. The horse is skittish but thirsty, and Alara, who has a quiet way with animals that her late husband always admired, is able to gentle it with a soft word and a slow hand. She sees the brand on its flank, a simple C inside a broken circle, the mark of the newcomer, the man who bought the old Miller place, a patch of hard-luck land that had already broken 3 families. The townsfolk in Redemption called him the poor farmer, a man who kept to himself, bought only the barest essentials, and looked as weathered and worn as the land he was trying to tame. Returning the horse is not a question, it is an imperative. In this territory, a man's horse was his life. To keep it would be a theft worse than stealing from the collection plate. She takes the reins, her worn leather gloves creaking, and turns toward the Miller place, the heavy weight of the saddlebags thumping rhythmically against the chestnut's side. She assumes they are full of tools or meager supplies, never once imagining that she is leading a fortune across the plains. And with that simple act of frontier decency, her life, and his, were irrevocably changed. Alara had learned solitude the hard way. It had settled over her small homestead like a permanent winter frost in the 2 years since Thomas had been taken by a fever. The cabin they had built together, once filled with his low laughter and the scent of his pipe smoke, was now just a space defined by echoes and emptiness. Her days were a litany of chores that stretched from before sunrise to long after dusk, tending her small flock of chickens, weeding the vegetable garden that was more dust than soil, and mending clothes until her fingers were raw. She was a fixture in the town of Redemption, a respectable widow who earned a few coins selling eggs and patched quilts to Mr. Gable at the mercantile. He, like the rest of the town, treated her with a kind of pitying reverence, a woman holding on by a thread. The man with the C brand, Caleb, was a different sort of solitary. He'd arrived 6 months prior with nothing but the chestnut horse, a wagon of bare supplies, and a silence as vast as the prairie itself. He'd paid cash for the Miller place, a fact that had caused a brief stir before people saw the state of him. His clothes were patched, his face was etched with a sorrow that looked older than his years, and he worked the cursed land with a grim determination that bordered on punishment. Whispers in Gable's mercantile painted him as a man running from something, a failed farmer from back east, a man with a dark past, or simply a fool who didn't know when he was beaten. Alara had seen him in town only a handful of times, a tall, gaunt figure who met no one's eye and spoke only when necessary. He looked like a man who had forgotten how to hope, and Alara understood that feeling all too well. The journey to his homestead was a long 2 miles, the sun beating down on her neck. The saddlebags were a nuisance, heavy and cumbersome. At one point, she'd considered taking them off to lighten the load, but decided against it. They weren't hers to touch. As she approached the dilapidated farmhouse, she saw him. He was trying to reset a fence post, his back muscles straining under a sweat-stained shirt. He moved with a weary strength, a man pushing a boulder uphill day after day. He heard her approach and straightened slowly, wiping a forearm across his brow. His eyes, a pale, guarded blue, narrowed with suspicion as he saw her leading his horse. He didn't look relieved. He looked wary, as if expecting an accusation. "This your horse?" Alara asked, her voice raspy from the dust. He gave a curt nod, his gaze fixed on her, then the horse, then back to her. Where'd you find him? Grazing wild up on the East Ridge. Figured he threw you. Broke his tether, Caleb said, the words clipped. He walked over, running a hand down the chestnut's neck, a flicker of something soft in his expression before it vanished. He looked at Alara, truly looked at her, for the first time. He saw the frayed cuffs of her dress, the exhaustion in her posture. I'm obliged to you, ma'am. It's just what a neighbor does, she replied, handing him the reins. His eyes flicked to the saddlebags, and a tension she couldn't name tightened his jaw. He reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 coins. For your trouble. Alara's spine stiffened. She had little, but she had her pride. I didn't do it for money. I did it because it was right. He seemed taken aback, his hand hovering in the air between them. He studied her face, the unwavering set of her jaw, the honesty in her clear gray eyes. He slowly drew his hand back. Then, I'm in your debt. There's no debt, she said, turning to leave. The matter was settled. Wait, his voice stopped her. At least let me offer you some water for your journey back. It wasn't an offer of hospitality. It felt more like a test, a reluctant crack in his formidable wall. She hesitated, then nodded. It was a long, hot walk home. She followed him to the well, the silence stretching between them. As he worked the pump, she noticed the state of his cabin. The roof sagged, the porch steps were rotten, and the whole place looked one strong wind away from collapsing. He was not a poor farmer. He was destitute. He handed her a tin cup of cool water. As she drank, her gaze fell again on the saddlebags, which he had quickly unbuckled and was now carrying toward the cabin with a strange, protective posture. They were far heavier than she'd thought. He must be carrying smithing tools, she reasoned. That would explain the weight. Thank you, she said, handing back the cup. He just nodded, his attention already elsewhere, his mind clearly burdened. As Alara and Patience made their way back across the prairie, she couldn't shake the image of him, a man drowning in silence, on a patch of land that offered no salvation. She felt a pang of sympathy, a kinship in their shared isolation. A few days later, a shadow fell over her doorway. It was Caleb. He stood on her porch, holding a freshly repaired axe in one hand and a small, cloth-wrapped bundle in the other. He looked awkward, out of place. Your axe, he said, extending it to her. I saw the handle was split when I passed by the other day. I took the liberty. Alara was stunned into silence. She hadn't even noticed him pass by. She took the axe. The new hickory handle was smooth and perfectly fitted, the work of a skilled craftsman. You didn't have to do that. You refused payment, he stated, as if that explained everything. This is barter. For my horse, he pushed the bundle into her other hand. And this? She unwrapped it. Inside were 4 thick slices of smoked bacon. It was a luxury she hadn't been able to afford in months. Tears pricked her eyes, and she was furious at herself for the weakness. This is too much. It's what a neighbor does, he said, echoing her own words back to her. Before she could protest further, he tipped his hat and was gone, striding back across the field, leaving her on the porch with a repaired tool, a rare treat, and a profound sense of confusion. This was not the act of a man who was destitute. This was the act of a man paying a debt of honor. Their silent arrangement continued. A week later, she found a neat stack of firewood by her door, chopped and ready for her stove. In return, she left a basket of eggs and a jar of her wild plum preserves on his porch step. They never spoke of it. It was a language of gestures, a conversation held across the expanse of prairie that separated their lonely worlds. Alara's trips to Redemption became fraught with a new kind of tension. Mr. Gable, a man whose nose for gossip was as sharp as his cheese knife, had noticed her quiet defense of the newcomer. Saw that Caleb fellow out your way, Alara, he'd said one afternoon, weighing out a small bag of flour. Strange man. A body's got to wonder what he's doing on that worthless plot. Heard tell he was a failed prospector. He's a hard worker, Alara had replied, her tone sharp enough to make Gable raise an eyebrow. And a good neighbor. Well, good neighbors don't always pay the bills, Gable sniffed, sliding her meager purchase across the counter. His words stung because they were true. Her own reserves were dwindling, and the coming winter loomed like a gathering storm. The first real storm of the season arrived not as snow, but as a torrential, freezing rain that turned the world to mud. Alara spent the day securing her chicken coop and praying the roof would hold. As dusk fell and the rain turned to sleet, she found her thoughts drifting to Caleb in his broken-down cabin. Worry, an unfamiliar feeling when it concerned anyone but herself, gnawed at her. Against her better judgment, she ladled a generous portion of the rabbit stew she'd made into a pail, pulled on Thomas's old oilskin coat, and ventured out into the tempest. The wind fought her every step of the way. By the time she reached his cabin, she was soaked through and shivering. She knocked, her knuckles numb. The door opened a crack, and Caleb stared out, his face grim in the lantern light. "Mrs. Hayes?" he asked, his voice rough with disbelief. "What on God's earth are you doing out in this?" "I brought you some stew," she said, her teeth chattering. "I was worried about your roof." He opened the door wider, and she saw the evidence of his battle. Buckets were scattered across the floor, catching drips from a dozen leaks. He was as soaked as she was. He took the pail from her wordlessly and gestured for her to come inside. The cabin was even more sparse than she'd imagined. A simple cot, a small table, a single chair, and a crate. And there, tucked beneath the cot, were the heavy leather saddlebags. "Thank you," he said, his voice softer now. "Sit. Get warm." He stoked the small fire in the hearth. They ate the stew in near silence, the only sounds the drumming of the rain and the hiss of water hitting the embers. For the first time, the quiet between them felt less like a wall and more like a shared space. "My wife, Sarah, she hated the rain," he said suddenly, his voice low. Said it felt like the sky was weeping. Alara's heart clenched. It was the first time he had ever spoken of a past. "My Thomas, he loved it. He said it was the land drinking its fill, getting ready to give back." She looked around the leaking cabin. "This land doesn't give much back." A shadow crossed Caleb's face. "No, it doesn't." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "People in town, they think I'm a fool for trying." "People in town have short memories," she countered. "Every homesteader is a fool until their first good harvest." He managed a small, sad smile. It transformed his face, easing the hard lines around his eyes. "Sarah would have liked you," he said quietly. "You have the same steel." That night, something shifted. They were no longer just two solitary figures defined by their loss. They were Caleb and Alara, neighbors who had shared a meal in a storm. As she left, the rain having eased to a drizzle, he stopped her at the door. "Be careful, Alara." Using her given name felt as momentous as a vow. The following week, the real trouble arrived. Two men rode into redemption, their faces hard and their eyes constantly scanning. They stabled their horses and went directly to the saloon, asking questions. Gable, whose mercantile doubled as the town's information hub, was practically vibrating with excitement when Alara came in for thread. "They're asking about a man," he whispered conspiratorially. "A man who came into some money back in the Colorado Territory. Gold. Said he stole it from his dead wife's family and ran." Gable leaned closer. "Their description, tall, quiet, looks haunted. It fits your neighbor, Alara. Fits him to a T." Alara felt a cold dread wash over her. The heavy saddlebags. His secrecy. His patched clothes, a perfect disguise for a man on the run. The bacon, the axe handle. Were they acts of kindness or payments from a guilty conscience? Doubt was a bitter poison. She left the mercantile, her mind reeling. Could she have been so wrong about him? The two men were still in town when Caleb appeared at her homestead 2 days later. He didn't come with a repaired tool or a gift of food. He came with a look of desperation in his eyes, the look of a man whose time had run out. "Alara," he said, his voice strained. "I need to talk to you. I should have done this sooner." She led him inside, her heart pounding a nervous rhythm against her ribs. She braced herself for a confession of theft, for a plea for help she wouldn't know how to give. He didn't sit down. He paced the small cabin like a caged animal before stopping in front of her. "The men in town, they're my wife's brothers-in-law from her first marriage. And Mr. Gable is right. I do have gold, but I didn't steal it." He finally met her eyes, and she saw not guilt, but a profound, weary honesty. "My Sarah's first husband was a monster. He beat her, controlled her. When he died, he left everything to his brothers, Silas and Jonah, cutting her out completely. But her father, a prospector, had left her a private inheritance years ago, a cache of gold dust and coins he'd hidden away. It was hers, and hers alone. It was our chance to get away, to start over somewhere they could never find us." He took a deep breath, the story pouring out of him now. We were on our way here when she took ill. The fever, it was fast. Her last wish was that I take the gold, find a piece of land, and build a life. A life of peace. She made me swear I wouldn't let her first husband's family get their greedy hands on it. They believe any money tied to their family name belongs to them. He finally stopped pacing, his gaze pleading with her to understand. I've been living like this, pretending to be a poor farmer, so they wouldn't find me. I was waiting until I had the deed to this land clear and could legally buy the spread next to it. I was going to build a ranch, a place Sarah would have been proud of, he gestured helplessly. But they found me before I could. He walked to the door and returned a moment later with the saddlebags. He unbuckled the straps on her floor and with a heavy thud, poured out the contents. It wasn't just a few coins. It was a river of gold. Dust in leather pouches, gleaming nuggets, and stacks of double eagles that shone in the lamplight. It was a fortune that could change a life or end one. I came here to warn you, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. They've been watching my cabin. They'll likely come here next, seeing as we've been acquainted. You need to tell them you know nothing, that I'm just a failed farmer. You shouldn't be in this danger. Alara looked from the pile of shimmering gold to the anguish on his face. This wasn't the confession of a thief. It was the testament of a man honoring a sacred promise. All her doubt vanished, replaced by a fierce, protective certainty. She saw the truth not in the gold, but in the honorable, grieving man standing before her. She had been judging him by the state of his farm, just as the town had. But his true worth lay in his character, in his devotion to a memory. No, she said, her voice firm and clear. Caleb looked at her, confused. No, I won't tell them I know nothing, she said, pushing the gold back toward him with the toe of her boot. You'll bring that gold inside. You'll hide your horse in my barn. And when they come, we will face them together. A look of stunned disbelief crossed his features. Alara, you don't understand. Silas is a hard man. He's cruel. I've faced hard things before, she replied, her gaze unwavering. And I know the difference between a thief and a man of honor. They are not taking your wife's legacy, Caleb. Not from this land. For the first time since she'd met him, Caleb's walls of grief and solitude crumbled completely. In their place was a raw, burgeoning hope. He had come to protect her from his past, and instead, she had chosen to stand with him in his present. The decision was made. They wouldn't run. They would make their stand right here, on the small patch of earth Alara called home. They worked quickly, a silent, efficient team. The gold was secured beneath a loose floorboard in Alara's root cellar, a place no one but she would know to look. Caleb's horse, Titan, was led into the small barn behind the cabin, hidden from the main road. They didn't have to wait long. Just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, ominous shadows across the plains, two riders appeared. They reined in their horses a few yards from the porch, their arrogant posture a stark contrast to the quiet dignity of the homestead. The larger of the two, a man with a thick neck and cruel, small eyes, dismounted. This had to be Silas. Ma'am, he said, his voice a low growl that held no respect. We're looking for a man. Caleb Thorne. We were told he's been keeping company with you. Alara stepped out onto the porch, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. She stood straight and calm, her presence commanding the small space. Caleb moved to stand in the doorway just behind her, a silent, solid shadow. I know Mr. Thorne, Alara said, her voice even. He's my neighbor. Silas's lip curled into a sneer. He's more than that. He's a thief. He ran off with family money after my sister-in-law passed. Money that belongs to us. I believe you're mistaken. Caleb's voice cut in, low and steady. He stepped forward to stand beside Alara, no longer hiding. The gold was Sarah's inheritance from her own father. You have no claim to it. The second man, Jonah, laughed, a high, unpleasant sound. No claim? Our brother's wife, our brother's money. That's the law of family. That is the law of bullies and thieves, Alara said, her voice ringing with a clarity that made both men flinch. They had expected to intimidate a broken farmer, not confront a resolute woman on her own property. Silas's eyes narrowed, focusing his venom on her. This is not your concern, widow. Step aside before you get hurt. It was a threat, plain and simple. In that moment, standing on her porch, defending a man she barely knew but believed in completely, Alara felt more alive than she had in years. The grief that had been her constant companion receded, replaced by a cold, righteous anger. "Everything that happens on this land is my concern," she declared, taking a step forward. "And this man you call a thief is under my protection. He is my husband." The lie was a thunderclap in the quiet evening air. It stunned Silas and Jonah into silence. It stunned Caleb, too. He looked at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something else, a profound, heart-stopping gratitude. He recovered instantly, moving to place a protective hand on her shoulder, playing his part in her audacious claim. Silas sputtered, his face turning a blotchy red. "Husband? That's a lie. He only just got here. We were married by a traveling preacher 2 weeks ago," Alara said, the fabrication coming to her with astonishing ease. "We were keeping it quiet until we could file the papers in redemption. Now, you are trespassing on the property of Mr. and Mrs. Thorne. I suggest you leave." Her use of the name, the solid weight of it, gave them pause. In the territory, a widow's word held weight, and her property was sacrosanct. To harass a man was one thing. To threaten a newly married woman on her own land in front of her husband was another matter entirely. It was a line that even bullies like Silas were hesitant to cross, for it could bring the whole community, and potentially the law, down on them. "You've got no proof," Jonah stammered, looking less sure of himself. "And you have no proof of your claim to any money," Caleb countered, his voice like iron. "Sarah's will is with a lawyer in Denver. It names me as her sole heir. If you persist, I will see you both charged with harassment and attempted extortion." The combination of Alara's fierce, unexpected defense and Caleb's calm, legal threat was too much for them. They had come expecting to find a scared man alone, easy to break. They found a united front, a fortress built of lies and a deeper, unshakable truth. Silas stared at them, his face a mask of fury and frustration. He looked from Alara's unyielding face to Caleb's steady gaze and knew he was beaten. They had no legal leg to stand on, and Alara's reputation in the community would make any accusation he leveled against them seem like the ravings of a greedy, scorned man. With a final, venomous curse, Silas swung himself back into his saddle. "This ain't over," he spat. "Oh, I believe it is," Alara said softly. They watched as the two men rode away, their retreating forms swallowed by the twilight. The immediate danger was gone. The air, which had been thick with menace, was suddenly still. There was only the sound of the crickets starting their evening song and the frantic beating of Alara's heart. The silence that followed their departure was profound, charged with the weight of the lie she had told and the truth it had protected. Caleb turned to her, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. The tension of the confrontation drained away, leaving a quiet, trembling vulnerability in its place. "You called me your husband," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Alara met his gaze, the vast prairie spreading out behind him, painted in the soft hues of sunset. She did not look away. It seemed the right thing to say. He took a step closer, his hands finding hers. They were calloused and strong, and they held hers with a gentle reverence. "It was the bravest thing I've ever seen." He looked around at her small, humble homestead, the place she had so fiercely defended. "Alara," he began, his voice thick. "That gold, it was meant to build a future. A home. I think I've just found it." The saddlebags full of gold lay hidden beneath the floorboards, but the real treasure was standing right there on the porch. It was the quiet strength of a woman who offered protection to a stranger, the steadfast honor of a man keeping a promise to the wife he had lost. It was the unexpected discovery that two lonely souls, weathered by loss and hardship, could stand together and forge a fortress against the world. He didn't let go of her hands. Looking out over the land that stretched before them, a land that had demanded so much and given so little, it suddenly felt full of promise. The wind still blew, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like it was stealing anything. It felt like a whisper of a new beginning. The poor farmer and the lonely widow were gone. In their place stood two people who had found in each other a value far greater than gold. This story showed love and heroism where least expected. What was your favorite moment of connection between them? Tell us in the comments. Thanks for watching. If you believe in compassion, overcoming prejudice, and finding love in unexpected places, Give this story a like and subscribe for more.